Hi, I'm Rafe. Welcome to another edition of Introduction to Comics. Today's topic will be the collecting of comics, what you can buy, where you can buy it, how you protect what you buy. I want to start by talking about the different formats of comics. Basically, you've got three formats. You've got the comic book, you've got the graphic novel, and you've got the trade paperback. Now, a lot of people use the terms comic and graphic novel interchangeably. I'm not one of them. To me, a comic book is the short, regularly published installments of the story. These typically run about 23 to 30 pages, and here what we have is Power Girl number 5. I don't want to go over the whole anatomy of the comic again. I went over that in the first video. This is what people collect, typically. The collectors are interested in comic books, graphic novels, yes, to a certain degree, trade paperbacks, somewhat, but this is where the money is made, so to speak. In contrast to the comic book, we have the graphic novel. Now, this is Marvel's first graphic novel, The Death of Captain Marvel. Notice that it is indeed larger. It is also, what distinguishes it the most, however, is that it is a one-shot deal. It comes out once. It's not necessarily part of the ongoing narrative, the continuity. Then there's the trade paperback. Now, what separates the trade paperback from the graphic novel or the comic book is the trade paperback is typically a collection of stories that appeared previously in comic book form. What they'll do is they'll take an entire story arc and collect them together, bind them in book form, and release them to bookstores and comic stores alike. So here we have a trade paperback. This is Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol Volume 1, Crawling from the Wreckage. What DC Comics has done here is they've taken a very popular run from Doom Patrol, written by Grant Morrison, and collected the first story arc. And this is what would be a middle range trade paperback, and I'll take you through each of the different types, the different price ranges, but this is definitely in the middle. So looking at the inside of this trade paperback, you see we have an introduction, basically setting up the situation that brought about this change in writer, the change in philosophy of the comic. Flipping the page, we can see that DC also includes the covers to the individual issues. This isn't something that's always done. So the introduction and the covers are two things that would bump this up from a very low grade trade paperback. You've also got the use of color. Sometimes what they'll do in order to save money or to make the book cheaper, they'll get rid of all the color and just go with the black and white images. This is what they do in the Showcase Presents and the Essential lines from the two major companies. So here we have Showcase Presents Booster Gold and the Essential Luke Cage Power Man Volume 1. These are the low end, however they do have the benefit of reprinting a lot of stories. The Essential Luke Cage reprints Hero for Hire issues 1 through 16 and Power Man 17 to 27. So you're getting 27 comics in this book form, and most of these run about $16. It's quite the bargain. Of course, what you gain in the sheer number of stories, you lose in the fact that they come in black and white. So here's the inside. As you can see, black and white print. The paper is definitely cheaper. This is printed on newsprint, while the Doom Patrol is printed on a finer grade of paper. Also, one thing I've noticed is with these larger volumes and the cheaper print and the cheaper binding, a lot of times what you'll get is the binding breaking. As you can see, the cover is tearing away from the innards of the book. In this area, you can see all the glue that's been left behind. There are, of course, if there's low end and middle end trade paperbacks, there's got to be high end. Those typically come in what's known as archives from DC. or Marvel Masterworks if you're buying Marvel, or other companies do these as well. Here we have the Best of Simon and Kirby. So what makes these the high end? What makes Archive and Marvel Masterworks the high end trade paperbacks? Well, first and foremost, you've got the hardcover with the dust jacket. These are library quality is what they like to call them. Typically what you're going to get is Golden or Silver Age stories focusing on one character or one book. You're going to get an introduction or a foreword, as you would with any other middle end, or with most of the middle end ones. And in the back, we get biographies of the different creators. Like I said, these are the high quality trade paperbacks. Hardcovers, nice introductions, nice biographical information, higher quality paper, higher quality binding. Of course, the trade-off is in the price. Typically, these are going to run $45 to $50 when they're first released. Some of them, of course, go even higher. I want to take this opportunity to take a bit of a divergence from our path to address one of the common misconceptions in comics. Now, so far I've dealt with Luke Cage and Booster Gold, Hawkman, and earlier we dealt with Power Girl. All of them are superheroes, and while superheroes are the most popular genre of comics, they are not the only genre. And this misconception, I think, has scared people away from comics. If you're interested in the comic book art form, or if you just find comics to be entertaining, there is a comic out there for you, whether you like superheroes or war stories or westerns or romance, whatever. If we're going to talk about other genres of comics, I think the place to start is with horror comics. In the early 1950s, EC Comics became a major player in the comics industry with their horror lines. This is a collection of Tales from the Crypt stories. You probably have seen Tales from the Crypt, the TV series, or Tales from the Crypt movies like Bordello of Blood. It all started with this comic from EC. Another genre that exploded in the 1950s was romance comics. What I have here is a collection of romance comics from St. John's, which the company eventually disappeared, but they were well known for their treatment of romance. They're considered among the best. And I want to show you another one of their books. So this is It Rhymes with Lust, which is quite probably the first graphic novel ever written. This was written by Leslie Waller and Arnold Drake in 1949, drawn by Matt Baker, who's considered to be the master of drawing women. And he did a ton of romance comics as a result. War comics exist. Jack Kirby wrote The Losers during the early 1970s when he moved over to DC away from Marvel. Just one example, war comics are still being published today. Conan represents two different genres of comics, or two different areas, I suppose. The genre would be the barbarian, sword and sorcery, epic type story. But it also brings in the element of being a literary adaptation. Jeff Smith's Bone is also based on a sword and sorcery foundation. So at this point, you've seen the different formats of comics, you've seen some of the different genres, and by no means think that that is the complete list of comic book genres. If you can think of a genre, you can find it in comics. There's philosophy in comics, there's westerns that I didn't show you. You name it, you can find it. This brings us to the end of part 1 of your introduction to collecting comics. Stay tuned for part 2, where we'll discuss the rest of it.